it turns out he's not just a buttoned up neurosurgeon who's like fabulously rich, or maybe he is fabulously rich, but he's somebody who comes from this background where it's his mom's last wish. He's warmer than she thought she was. He's not like this cold douchebag he assumed she was. And now you're catching feelings.
Welcome to the story. It's story time with Skye. You can fall in love and laugh until you cry. It's story time with Skye. It's story time with Skye.
Welcome to Storytime with Skye. I'm your host, New York Times bestselling author Skye Warren. Every week, I tell a brand new story based on the heroes, heroines, and meet-cutes that you want to hear about. I bring on some of my favorite romance authors as guests to help me craft a hilarious, steamy, and ultimately romantic story with a guaranteed happily ever after. So pour a glass of something fun. Welcome to the story. Hello, everyone. Skye Warren here, and I'm here with Theodora Taylor, who writes interracial romance, enemies to lovers, ruthless heroes. So we all love that. Hi, Theodora.
Hey, yo. Thanks so much for having me, Skye.
And unfortunately, the readers can't see this, but I'm going to point out your adorable orange earrings right now.
The orange slice earrings.
Full circle slices. I enjoy it very much. I feel like you have fun. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I try to, because, it's one of the most fun jobs in the world.
It really is.
I think everybody who's come from the 9-to-5 world, it's just like, oh, when you hear about your friends getting up at 9 o'clock, instead of, it's just like, well, you're going to work. I'm going to go get this woman off an alien ship.
And then also for work, you're like, I have to show up and do this podcast where we're going to talk about like steamy scenes and just like have fun.
Absolutely. I've been telling my kids all day, I have this meeting.
I have a meeting. I know. That's what I tell them. I'm like, guys, I need you to stay quiet because I'm recording. It sounds official.
I'm concerned about them going into the real world because they're going to think meeting. It's so much fun. There's always so much laughing. It's just like only when it's writers and readers. So
yes. Okay. So what we have are prompts. We have 3 different prompts. We have the hero, the heroine, and then something about how they get together, like a meet cute element.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell you the 3 elements. And as I tell you each one, like you'll kind of give me your initial reactions. A lot of times I'm curious like if you've written one before, what you think about them, like if you're getting any initial impressions. Anyway, so the hero is a doctor. Nice.
Yes.
That's one of those professions that like hits a little close because like so many people on one side of my family were doctors.
It's interesting for me with doctors because I love things like Grey's Anatomy. I watch it all the time, but I think I've only written at this point, I've written almost 50 books. And I've written maybe one male doctor, and he was a werewolf. So,
like on the side,
bad boy werewolf doctor. Right.
He probably had like really good vision and stuff like that, like motor acuity. I don't know.
But I love women doctors. I love writing heroines who are doctors who are put in a terrible situation, usually with a criminal or a really, really bad guy, but I've not written a male doctor. And usually when I kind of get those professions, for me personally, it's like doctor with a secret kink, like doctor who
I like that.
Rough,
Because he seems a certain way. He has to present a little bit like a professor, has to present a certain way. Right. And there's a taboo element if you have him be a patient, but unlike professors, it's a little easy to get out of that by just getting a different doctor. So that's the trick.
Exactly. Okay. Although it's romance, so sometimes I'm just like, oh, violate that. That's a rule. Like you're not supposed to do that. So that's a really, as someone who grew up in the 80s watching Thornbirds, I'm always just like, ooh, that's supposed to be doing that, So I love those kind of violations of rules.
Yes. Okay, so the heroine is a chess master.
Huh.
And so with these like prompts, we can go anywhere we want with them. So like
Mhm.
she can be a chess master on something else, kind of like he can be a doctor and a werewolf. So like it's totally up to us which direction we want to go with that. So I sort of do have a chess series with like all the chess pieces on it. It's a lot about chess, but I wouldn't actually call her a chess master. She does play, she's good at it. That's not like, I would say she probably does qualify, but I'm thinking, I guess when I hear chess master, I did read this book by Annabelle Joseph where that's like the heroine's actual profession and she like plays professionally.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's funny. I think as a writer, when I hear that, I'm always so impressed with the research. I'm always just kind of like,
Oh, yes. No, that book is
are you a
very
chess
good.
master? Or how did you do the research? Did you get to watch hours and hours of chess things? And so that
Yeah, no,
seems
so
like
it's
it'd be
funny
a
because
fun research.
my book, like book one of my series is called The Pawn. And even though they play chess and they also do certain dirty things with chess pieces, it's still more of a motif than it is like the storyline. Whereas the book that I'm thinking of is called just like Pawn without the in front of it. And it's by under her pen name, I think. Like she has a contemporary pen name, but Annabelle Joseph is like who wrote it. And it's very impressive. Like it feels very realistic in a way that, you know, I'm assuming she researched. It's very cool. Okay. And then the meet cute is someone saying I object at a wedding. I feel like her eyes lit up when I said doctor and chess master, but when I said someone saying object at a wedding, she was like,
No, I like object at the wedding. It's the
oh, you
opposite.
do? You do?
I
Okay.
was like, oh, I've never, and it's funny when I heard chess master, I've had a few guys who play chess, but I usually give it to the hero, not the heroine.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm going to teach you how to play chess. Like, this is going to be a very naughty chess lesson, or really this romance that you're kind of trying to resist. It resists. So I object at a wedding. I love an interrupted wedding. How about you?
I don't think I write a lot of weddings, honestly. I'm not like opposed to them. I just think I don't go there like automatically. My mind doesn't go there. I've like barely written any weddings, much less objecting would be like another level. I've definitely never done that. So that's interesting. I think the closest I came is that I had a love triangle where a guy won and then the other guy had to like go to their wedding and he was in love with both of them.
Mm.
So it was very hard for him. So then, even though he's like a super cinnamon roll type of hero, he was so upset over going to this wedding that he like found this like essentially sex worker and was just like, let's have dirty sex until I get this out of my system.
Mm.
Obviously fell for her.
As you do.
As you know, it's just natural.
Whenever you try to get somebody out of your system, it's not the way. It's kind of like trying to get heroin out of your system by doing more.
Which is a funny thing because like I feel like characters do that a lot. I'm not sure I've ever had that. Like I've ever thought I'm gonna get someone out of my system. Like that's been a real plan, you know?
No, I absolutely, it's funny because I think, you know, obviously I have a universal fantasy brand, and it's always just like there are some fantasies that are kind of stemmed in fantasy life, and then there's some fantasies that are stemmed in both real and fantasy lives. And I think a lot of women are pretty, or a lot of maybe people are pretty logical about things. And so they're just going to say, oh, if this person is making me feel vulnerable, like I could fall too hard, I'm going to actually put some distance between us. Whereas in romance land, they always are just kind of like, well, here's my plan. Not the best plan. I'm just going to have really no strings attached sex, and then I'm going to get attached. So
yeah. And so readers, I think most authors know this, but maybe you don't. And also readers, Theodora Taylor writes, like she said, like 50 fiction books, but she also has a nonfiction book that she's written about something that she terms universal fantasy. And she uses the analogy of butter as like the delicious stuff that we put on our food that we all love. And so I thought that would be really interesting for us to talk about as we go through here. I mean, like, what is the butter around someone saying I object at a wedding? Like, there's obviously something there that's compelling, right?
I don't know. I think it's rituals interrupted because I
Oh.
think we have all of these things that we do. And I think a lot of butter comes from the fact that most rituals just go to plan. Like no one ever says object. Nobody ever really.
Right. No one ever actually objects. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny. I want to say like maybe 3 years ago, we were at this hotel in Hawaii on Christmas Day, and there was this party. And I walked out of the party on the Christmas Day dinner party, whatever theme it was. And a woman, while I was gone in the bathroom, I came back. Everybody was cheering because a guy had proposed to his girlfriend and she said yes. Everyone was clapping. And then one of the things that struck me about it is, A, I was so upset that I missed it. And B, because I've never seen that happen it happen in public. I've never seen anyone propose in public. That was the first time. But then I was just kind of like, but I've written it into my books so often. Like you see it on television so often. And so part of the thrill of it is that, it is these things that you don't see often. It breaks up an otherwise boring, like what would be another traditional thing. It's a Christmas party, but now it's a proposal. And so the mood changes, everybody's celebrating. And I object at a wedding, especially if it's one of the characters or just a ruined wedding is a really great way, in my opinion, to start a story.
You know what it reminded me of when you said ritual interrupted, of like Snow White, where she's having what is it? Birthday party or like birth. And then she like comes in and she's like, Maleficent comes in and is like, I was not invited, but I'm here.
Her baptism, Sleeping Beauty.
Oh, yeah.
I think it is. And then, and Maleficent comes in and it's just a big disruption. And, it's just like, well, I curse you. I love curses as well. I've never used one in a book because I'm afraid of them in real life. But, but I love Sleeping Beauty. I love the start of that story. Like someone just walking in and being like, oh, like now you've done it.
Yeah. Okay. So who is saying they object? Who's getting married? Is it the doctor or the chess master, or is it like some other people? I feel like it probably should be one of them.
Oh, I feel it should be one of the characters too, just because neither of us, if it's interesting, I was actually thinking in the back of my mind, if this were a holiday movie, if this were a rom-com, I would totally say, oh, he's one of the attendants and she's the bridesmaid, and they somehow get together after this. But I really love the idea of it being one of them.
Yes.
And so I would say, because what I wrote down when I heard doctor was Darcy, just because that's my kind of ideal, like buttoned up doctor who secretly burns but maybe he's trying to attempt a cold wedding. And I kind of maybe like the idea of the chess master being a bit of a vixen, a bit of a badass, like not the kind of person that, like, I like the idea of her not being
what people would expect.
Right, like a doctor's wife to be. And so maybe this doctor is about to get married to the ideal woman.
I think what's interesting is that both the professions are like what we would traditionally term left brain type of professions. Like, but being a doctor is choosing the more traditional path with that skill set. And being a chess master is a very unconventional path. It's almost like being an Olympian, right? Like you your life to this thing that has like very questionable results, like it's it's very uncertain. So she's you could say she's successful, so she still does well, but it's not like a sure thing like the way that a 9-to-5 job is.
Do you think she's a trained talent, or do you think she's a prodigy?
I think to be a true chess master, you've got to be a prodigy and you've got to be trained. But I think the prodigy has to be part of it.
Mm.
The natural skill has to be there. Otherwise, you're never going to get to that level. It has to start at a high level and then you learn every possible combination of moves. And then you plot against the opponent and all of that. So I like the idea. I mean, the thing is, like a true genius, like oftentimes struggles to fit in.
How about if the bride is her sister, her perfect sister?
Oh my God, that hurts. Okay, so here's the only downside I see. So I originally thought it would go the other way where he's objecting.
Oh,
That I have with her being her is like, why is she objecting? So like in the case of him objecting, it's more like it's a very Darcy-ish thing to do, right? Like I insulted you, why didn't it work? And then you went and married this other guy. Now at the last moment, I finally have to stop it. Whereas if it's her, I feel like there's this point where she'd be a little bit like, if that's what he wants, then shouldn't I let him have it? You know what I mean? Like, what is her rationale for stopping him?
well, so I think the reason I thought sister, it didn't occur to me. This is actually kind of fun. It's like there's always like where I would go with it, and then there's just kind of like, ooh, but you could also go there, and I wouldn't have thought of that. But so I was thinking he's getting married to her sister.
Yeah.
And she's like this kind of chess person chess master who doesn't really fit in with her otherwise perfect family. She's weird. She's maybe the family. I love a black sheep in a family. Like,
you know what I also like in terms of butter, and this is not even my personal type of favorite thing, but I think in this case, if we're gonna have a sister that's like opposite her, of like twins,
I love that. I should full disclosure, I have a set of twins.
You do.
Yes, yeah. So it's always interesting because they're completely opposite and they die for each other. And so it's one of those things where especially my twins are fraternal, but book writing, I love identical twins.
You know what I just realized? I was like, why would she stop his wedding if this is what he wants, right? Even if she's into him and everything. But then I just realized, what if she's stopping it on behalf of her sister?
That's what I was going Yeah, it's because if your sister's getting married to this douche, and it's just kind of like because he's good on paper, and you're like, you can't live your life like this, and you like disrupt this guy's wedding. Like, first of all, now
it's also giving Bridgerton season 2. You know what I mean? Like, there's like the doctor is into the chess master. He's already made that clear, but he wants to go ahead with the wedding for his own reasons. And she has to say, like, you can't do this because, like, to her sister, because she can't let her commit herself like that when she knows that this doctor is actually maybe into her. She may just assume, I don't know if she assumes he's into her or if he's just a player or whatever, but she knows he's not fully committed to the sister.
I think, like, I really love to bring, I really love love. So I'm always just like, there's another love story going on. So maybe the sister has a secret girlfriend or somebody like that. And it's just kind of like, you cannot do this. You cannot marry this guy.
I think that's a place that I think Bridgerton season 2 could have gone, because in that respect, it was a little bit more understandable because that's how courting went. But especially if we're talking about modern times, if someone's not that into you usually. Yeah. So why are you marrying them? Right? Like, you have to have your own reason.
Because you're good on paper. I think people are very practical, and sometimes they're too practical. It's funny. My sister is a engineer, and her husband's a civil engineer, she's a chemical engineer, and the way they proposed was just really practical. She was just like, oh, would you like children? He's like, I would like children. And she's like, well, I'm older, so we should get married. And if you want children, I would like to have children within the bounds of marriage. And he was just like, okay, yeah, let's get married then. And then they went to the mall to a ring store. And she's like, I'd like that ring. And so, and then they got married. It was just kind of And it was just very like, I love that story because it's the most engineering proposal. It's like it felt very Vulcan, like this makes sense.
Yes, yes.
We are, you know, we are compatible. We are both engineers and we would like to have a child. So we should get married, you know, in order to have this child. And now, and, you know, now they're married with a kid. And so I do like, so I do think doctors, especially like if he's something high, like a neurosurgeon, he wants to marry someone, and she doesn't have to be another doctor. She could be someone who's like has a practical career. You know, she makes sense on paper, but then, you know, it's always
even like, I mean, some of those, like if you're like this top neurosurgeon, your hours are going to be wild. So like
yes,
you actually do want like a homemaker type of person.
yes,
This chess maker who's like chess master who's like traveling and has this like Olympian style career is not the right person.
wears heavy eyeliner.
And chunky boots, yeah.
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 Yeah. And boots.
And I would love
some kind of boots
I would
situation.
love that of like the way that the other people would who were there would judge her, you know what I mean? Because they take it very seriously. It's a very male dominated like sport. And regardless of gender, everyone takes it very seriously. So they show up in their boring clothes, you know, and she's just like doing this.
Yeah, I like it. I like whenever you have someone who is just really, really cool, like misfit within their profession. Like, you know, somebody who is just kind of like, I'm not staid, I'm not boring, I do this. You know, I almost have, maybe she has World of Poker personality or something like that. Like she's just a really interesting person in her. I was listening to this one podcast, Normal Gossip, and the woman and they were talking about Taylor Swift breaking up with Joe Alwyn, and the host was just like, "Oh, I'm so happy. He was just so boring. He was basically sentient mayonnaise."
So,
So
I mean, it happened at the same
yes.
time
As what?
as like the Barbie movie coming out and being like, he's just Ken, like she's everything.
Yeah. So if you know this, but this is her twin, and so it's just kind of like you're trying to be what mom and dad want you to be. She's never a black sheep. She's just like, oh, I should marry a doctor and do exactly this thing, and they're both kind of living this paper dream, and it's not, and it's not really what's good for her sister. So
Okay,
you
so
know,
it's like a gorgeous wedding. It's an over the top wedding
oh
because
yeah, so expensive, so
Ex-
expensive.
exactly, like full cathedral, full white dress with train.
Oh my gosh.
She had up till this moment maybe decided to stay quiet, but just could not anymore. I sort of think something still may have happened with her and the doctor right before the wedding. But anyway, and so she objects. And then they have the conversation with the sister. How does she convince her sister? Because the sister has decided to do this and has gotten pretty deep. You know what I mean? So why does her sister, like her sister's going to take her aside and be like, what's going on? Why are you objecting? And they're going to talk about it. And that's why I sort of think something should have happened with the doctor and the chess master. Like he kissed me, you know?
Yeah, but that's cheating.
I know it's a really
So like it's interesting because like what happened beforehand that sparks this other than you know her altruism.
but it has to be something big enough where the sister is going to be like, yeah, I will put off this entire wedding rather than go through with it because she has that option.
So I mean there's two ways you could go about it. This could be his first time meeting her. Like this could just be how she shows up. Like I object, don't do this, da da da, you know who you really want to be with, blah blah blah, and then she runs off with her best friend who's in the audience, you know, or something like that, and they're finally going to be together. Or it could just be like,
ooh, I just had an idea.
I'll go.
Okay, what if it's less about what the doctor did, because I agree then you get into cheating and it's awkward and everything, but what if it's the person who loves the sister is like having a breakdown, writes a poem, does something, And so the chess master, the heroine, goes forward and is like, this is who you really love. I mean, you said it basically, but like, that's why she comes, that's the impetus for her doing that. That the person that you really love is over here. They've, you know, they're ready to commit now. Maybe they weren't before. And so, like you said, the sister runs off with her happily ever after. And the hero is pissed, right? Because he just has like this huge society wedding. It was exactly, everything was planned exactly how he wanted it to be. And she ruined it. And what if he's like, now I have this expensive honeymoon to Aruba and you have to come?
What if he's like, you gotta go on the honeymoon with me?
Like, it's your fault this happened.
Yes, I do love the idea. It's interesting because it's getting them there. Like, how do we, I am 100% for she goes on this honeymoon with him for some reason. And so there's two ways you can get into it. You can do your classic rom-com way, which is that the sister had her own ticket, and oh, this happens so often when we used to live in LA and my husband was in the industry. Like, you know, we had to plan our wedding for a particular time when his show was on hiatus. And if you didn't do your wedding while your show was on hiatus, then often people would get married because they could get that date, and then they would have to wait until their show was on hiatus for the actual honeymoon. So I think with neurosurgeons, I'm sure doctors have like big surgeries they're supposed to do. So maybe the wedding is 2 weeks later. The sister is just like, take my ticket, and she goes. And then the doctor has also decided to still go on the honeymoon. So they're both there.
So you think it's less of like him demand. I feel like he could demand it, you know, like because of that explosive spark on Darcy, you know, like
one of my guys would demand it. Like, I'd rather, like, I do love, if I'm watching a Christmas movie, that's exactly what I want to see. I want to see them. What are you doing here? What? There's only one bed. I love that. But if it's one of my darker guys, it's just like, no, he's like demanding that she take her place.
Okay, let's do demanding because I like it better, and I think that's what you would write. So like, he's demanding. She says, okay. She could be thinking.
I run into this all the time. We got to get her to the okay. And this is where my editor would be like, why is she agreeing to this?
I think she is intrigued by him. My impression is still that they've met before. Like, this is not the first time meeting. Because if she's truly close to her sister, she would have made the time. You know what I mean? Even if she had a big match or whatever. And her sister wouldn't have also scheduled her wedding such that like her sister couldn't meet him and stuff like that. So she's interested in him. She's gonna think he's off limits, even with him not marrying her sister. She's gonna assume he's off limits.
So I like a badass. I do like the idea of her being badass, but I also like the idea of her being like, you know, the big problem with prodigies, especially if you started off as a kid chess prodigy, is that you're often really inexperienced. So this could be a chance to get rid of a V card or have a good experience. Like maybe she's only had bad sets with some random other chess person or whatever. And
like, that's the thing, is it is a very guy's world, and like sexism plays a role. Like, I mean, it plays a role everywhere, but like it plays a role in chess. And she would have been surrounded by all of these guys who are just like, you know how guys can be about gatekeeping to like comic books and things like that. But like her entire life, right, since the time she was like 5, she's only been around guys trying to gatekeep her.
Right.
Out. So, I mean, it's not like you had a lot of opportunity. You either never did it, which I sort of think is the case here, especially because she seems so tough. So how is she going to be vulnerable with one of these guys and tell them, hey, I've never done this before, you know?
So yeah, I like that. I like that he's angry. And so he's going to have the kind of, he wants to have with her the kind of maybe rough, dominant sex that he wouldn't have had with her.
Yeah, and he thinks that because of her
Stepford wife's sister.
exactly, and he thinks that because of her outward appearance that she is experienced. He is assuming.
Oh, I love that as a sex scene. Like she thinks she's more experienced than she is. There has to be some instruction. Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yes. Okay. So they're at this place. I literally don't even know where Aruba is. That's
one of those places. It's tropical.
It's tropical. There's a beach. There's a resort. They obviously have the best of everything at this place. Fancy honeymoon. There would be swimsuit scenes, right? Shower scenes of them sharing the suite. Oh, you know how you go in and like they've prepared the honeymoon suite with like candles or whatever, or like rose petals. They walk into that, you know?
Well, I think it's supposed to be like no strings attached sex, but then they keep on being put in these situations where it's more than sex. Like you said, you walk in, candles, sweet. But I think I love the situation, and I love that they're in the situation, but what is the story engine? Like that it's supposed to be, the challenge of it is that it's going to be no strings attached sex. It's going to be really hot. And so part of me is like, it feels like it needs, like, we can just be friends challenge, or, you know, something that they're working toward. And it's interesting because with fake relationship, for me, I always find that or with no strings attached relationships, that's the hardest thing. I always find, like, what are they going to do other than the sex?
So I kind of like the idea of maybe the people at this resort assuming they're actually married, and for whatever reason, them not correcting them, or them trying but not getting the message across.
Right.
It'd be kind of funny. So they keep getting put in situations like by the resort people of this is, you know, but the one I see what you mean in terms of like what is going to move them forward, like to that tipping point where they actually have to commit. I mean, one of the things is going to be the ticking clock. I think that's the good thing about this setup, which is that they have no reason to ever talk to each other once it's over. So they've got to get it sorted out by then.
So I just feel like, what is the goal on the guy's part? So what he wants to get her out of his system. He wants to forget about her after this.
I think it starts like that, but then once he discovers that she is actually not experienced, then it becomes like lessons.
I love the lessons. So this is basically them getting to know each other. So it feels like it needs either a challenge, a mystery, like something, or a goal, like a goal. So, you know, if it was something I was watching, I think that's why they would say, well, they have to pretend that they're in a relationship for this reason. Like there has to be a reason that they're doing this. Or it can't just be like they decided we're going to have a no strings attached relationship, because then it just doesn't have any forward momentum. And good, you know, and that's just for me. There are writers who can just kind of really steep a couple in this situation and just say, here, 3 sex scenes. Although if I were writing this short, I would love this situation, because it is just kind of like, it's a challenge. It's 3 days. We keep on getting closer. I
agree with you. For like a novella, this would actually it would work.
Yeah.
Full-length novel, you would need another element.
Yes.
What would be the other element? And is it on his side or her side?
Well, so usually I like, this is the hard thing about doing this, because this is where I would be like, you should think about that. And then I would go away for like, you know, I'd sleep on it, and it would be, but it's hard to kind of like come up with something. So
I just thought of something. We don't have to. Here's what I thought of. Okay, so we already know a lot about her life because the whole chess thing is interesting. The rebel thing is interesting. We met her sister already. Her sister fell in love. Like, we know a lot about her, but we don't know a lot about him, except for the fact that he's like this buttoned up, passionate, hiding, in hiding dude. What if part of the reason why he was like, can we get married? And part of the reason why he then wants to do this fake relationship with her, I know this is going to get a little sad, but what if like his mom is dying or like his grandma is dying?
I fucking love that.
And it's like her wish, So he's like, she's exclaiming silently, just FYI.
Oh, oh.
Which means that it doesn't end on the honeymoon, right? They agree to do this fake relationship. They go on the honeymoon, and then they might even have the dark moment on the honeymoon, but then they have to come back together to do
Yes.
this.
Well, I think, they're faking this whole thing for his mom, who's so sick she couldn't even travel to the wedding, right? And so it's just kind of like, it's literally her last wish. And so he's not going to let her down. I love that Darcy like, I'm very honorable. Like, I'm not going to let my mother down. And maybe he's not. And so there is an aspect where she believes he's something, but then it turns out that he's really this. So I like, I like the surprise of someone. Like, it turns out he's not just a buttoned up neurosurgeon who's like fabulously rich, or maybe he is fabulously rich, but he's somebody who comes from this background where it's his mom's last wish. He's warmer than she thought she was. He's not like this cold douchebag he assumed she was. And now you're catching feelings, because it's just kind of like,
yeah. I feel like almost any surgeon like has this, like, they're known for kind of having a god complex and coming off like arrogant, and he's going to come off this extra because he has this protection layer. And so yeah, it's not just going to be a soft spot. It's also going to be this idea that he did not come from this privileged high society background.
yes,
Even maybe her sister didn't know that about him
yes,
because they never got that close. And she lives, heroine lives in this high society. Her sister lives in it. Everyone she knows lives in it. He lives in it. So she just assumes he was always in it. And only when she meets his mom and does she realize like how hard both his mom and he had to work to put him through school, because it's a lot of school.
yeah, that's a lot of school. Also, as far as what I always love, when the character, like if she comes from a very cold mother and assumes like that he's from her exact background, which is like cold, I want you to, like, maybe it's a cold group of doctors, like a doctor, like this thing, and you could have been smart. You could have used your smarts to be a doctor, but instead you're this chess person. And if his mom loves her, like, it's just like, oh, you're so great. I couldn't have wished anything better for you. And she gets that kind of thing that she needs from his mom, and she gets real intimate connection with him. Yeah. Oh, now they're falling in love. But what would keep them, like, so we need this to blow up in our face somehow, like, something happens that they're starting to fall more and more in love. They're having great sex. Maybe, like, I always love a situation where maybe there's a family on the island, like maybe it's not Aruba, but some made up island or whatever, where his family's there, and maybe they insist on doing their own kind of wedding or traditional wedding, something like that. And then it just all blows up, like, this isn't and it comes out, his mom is disappointed, he doesn't meet his goal, and for whatever reason he blows up at her and blames her. But then the brothers are like, you were always this uptight, or someone in his family is just kind of like or maybe even his mom is like, you're always this uptight kid. I worried so much about you because you didn't let yourself feel. And the reason I liked her was, for the first time I saw you smiling, I saw you enjoying life, and that's all I wanted. That's why I wanted you to get married. Like, not so you'd be settled down with any old person, but because I wanted someone to bring out what she brings out in you. And then, of course, he has to chase her to the airport. All that good stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and that could have been on the horizon. Like, that after all of this, part of the clock is that, like, after the honeymoon and after meeting his mom, she has to jet off to like some important match, which highlights why they can't fit. That wasn't what anyone was trying to accomplish with this marriage anyway. So whether it was fake or not. So obviously when things fall apart, she is going to be like, well, I'll just leave. That's what I was going to do anyway.
Yeah.
And so he's going to have to chase her to the airport, and like, we're going to have a scene where he's like, wet and just being like, I love you.
Why is it raining? I love it. No, of course. It must be raining. It must be whatever. Whatever. I do love the idea, like when you said, as soon as you said she has to go to a chess thing, I like the idea of him coming, because maybe her family never comes to her games,
right?
Ever, and this is the first time she's ever had someone in the audience. And so not only does she see him in the audience and win, but then he does the big confession or whatever. It's like they're both really getting what they need and need from each other. She helps him kind of remember how to be whatever warm tropical culture he comes from again, and like unfreezes his Darcy-esque kind of thing. And he supports her. He shows her support in the chess thing, or maybe he's really finds it impressive that she's a chess master, even though her family does not. Like, I like the idea of him giving her just something that her cold family wasn't giving her.
Yes. And even though, so it's like her and her sister against her like parents, but the hard part is that even though she's close to her sister is still the perfect one. So she's still kind of alone, even though she has her sister. I also was just thinking about this idea of like, I don't know if we would want to go this route. Like, it would just depend on if you were like you had mentioned, kind of like doing an interracial romance, or like what culture he was from. But like, when I got married to my husband, we did like sort of like standard American style ceremony, non-denominational. And then we also, on the same day, which was way too much, by the way, did a like Hindi/Jain ceremony.
Oh, love it. Love things like that.
And had two receptions. Like, we did one, and then a lunch reception, and then another, and then a dinner reception, like, while being broke. Like, it was ridiculous. But the thing is, I was not actually told what would happen during the ceremony. Like, he sort of barely knew, kind of like he'd seen it as a kid, and he didn't know like a lot of specifics. His family was a mix. They didn't want him to get married, so they weren't like, hey, let's prepare her. He ended up having family there, but still, like, there wasn't this, they didn't know how to like prepare an outsider for this. So I went in like having no idea what was going to happen. And it was fine, because most of the time, like, they would just like whisper like, hey, now, get up, now sit down, walk in a circle, whatever. Right. But I remember there was this part where they were like, he explained this thing, and it was translated to me as like, well, now you both sit down, and whoever sits down, like, it's a little bit of a joke more than a real thing. Like, whoever sits down first is going to like rule the marriage. And without planning it at all, because I didn't even know this was going to happen, we both like looked at each other, and we kind of like did this, and then we like made sure we sat at the same time. I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So, I mean, that was like a good outcome, but there could be a bad outcome. You know what I mean? There could be like a surprise, like someone asks a question that they weren't prepared for. If they did this like quick fake relationship, it could be a surprise question that she stumbles over, and then it comes out, and then they have the big disaster, right? Where where it falls apart. And then she actually, so in this case, he doesn't follow her to the airport. She actually makes it all the way to her chess match, which I do like, because then we get to see her in her element.
Yes.
And then she's doing the chess match and he appears like in the audience, like there's probably like glass or something. And she wins the match. And then they go out and like, I still like a good windy, rainy scene. You know, they could go out to like, you know how some hotels have like a floor that's just like greenery, especially if it's in a huge city like New Delhi or something like that. And there's not a lot of greenery in it. It's like a luxury item. They'll have that. And so they could go there and like get rained on and have their like moment where they just, you know.
So at this point, I'm loving the idea of the person being an Indian doctor. Because first of all, it's just kind of like obviously I'm always attracted to the interracial romance. Like I really want like that romance where it's just kind of like, oh, we get to experience someone else's culture, or, you know, so in this case, I love the wedding story. I just love the wedding story and not knowing exactly what's going to happen. He's just like, I think this is what's going to happen. I just love that idea, but he's just like, just go along with whatever they say. And, you know, and I love the idea of them dancing together and then it all falling apart, like this night going beautifully and then it all falling apart. Like I love that beautiful moment before it just. And then I also like the idea of her match being in New Delhi, because it's just kind of like, well, then, you know, like, I don't know. It's just kind of more what I would call location butter. Like, oh, we get to experience a new location, or not a new location, but maybe new to your audience. And we get to have the location be a beautiful part of it. So I do like the idea of a rainstorm in this, I guess, open part of the hotel.
And I also like the idea of like his mom accepting her completely for who she is.
Yes.
And his, you know, and her own mother being unable to do that, which you had said. So yeah, okay. So we got through the dark moment and then we got them back together. So I feel like
I'd watch this. I'd read this.
Okay.
Like,
what would the epilogue be?
So I am I'm number one futuristic. If you, for anyone listening, for Galaxy.
Literally last week just went to Becca Syme's conference.
Oh, see, I'm so upset to miss it. Like the FOMO was so real. I'm like number one futuristic. So I'm always going to be like, well, what happened with the best friend, or what happened, like they're on their honeymoon and they get a call from the best friend for the next book, or, you know, he has a friend.
Oh my God, that's so strategic. And I am a strategic and I'm not futuristic, but unfortunately I don't naturally do that.
Oh, it's always just like, well, what book can we spin this in? I'm done with this book. Like it's so, like, if you read my books, almost exclusively the only reason you'll have an epilogue. Like I used to back when I was a young writer. No, I'm kidding. Like toward the beginning of my career, I would say, oh, you know, they have a baby, or there's a baby announcement, or there's a wedding, or something like that. And now it's always almost exclusively, it's a wedding where I'm going to introduce something about the next book. Or
I think it would be nice to end on a wedding, just because you started on a wedding.
Yes. So a real wedding. Yeah, a real wedding.
And where she just like, you know, the trend, I don't know why it's so controversial, but you know, the trend of having a not white dress.
Yes.
Like she would do that, right? Like,
right. Right. No, it'd be really cool. And maybe the mom's still alive and it's just like, oh, you know, and she gets to see it, and her parents fly over, and the sister flies over with the person who she's deeply happy with, and it's the perfect wedding for them, as opposed to this, you know, magazine layout that we saw.
Yeah, so I think either they could have the wedding and they could they could either like call the mom, or they could even do it like in the hospital chapel. Like, we don't need the whole society thing. Like, yes. This is the people who matter to us, just like the mom and like her sister.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That's really beautiful. Or it can be, oh, sorry. I always get so, because, my mom died when I was 19. So it's always really nice to do when you have a big event to like have them there somehow. And I think a lot of people with dead parents are just kind of like if you flash forward to a year later and she's there with them in some way in a picture or something like that. Oh, I'm trying to think of, was it Coco? Where they do Coco at the end of Coco, the Disney movie Coco, they do another Dead at the Day of the Dead. The grandma has passed. Sorry for the spoiler. Anyone hasn't seen Coco, but the grandma has passed. But you're like sobbing because you see the picture there, and so everybody's kind of happy and with so I like the idea of them doing maybe a beautiful beach wedding and having the mom there in some kind of formal spirit way, like with a picture or with in some way. Maybe during a really lovely connection moment, she gives the chess master, when they're still in a fake relationship, an important heirloom that she wants her to
There
have.
is a particular necklace. I don't know the specifics of how common it is, but there's a particular necklace that I believe the husband's family gives the bride. And I got that. I also got just like the clothes that I wore for my wedding and some jewelry. Like that's customary because it's like I'm joining the family. So it definitely makes sense to me that she would have all the heirlooms, right?
Yeah.
They weren't wealthy, so it wouldn't be, but that would make it that much more special, right? It's not a new gem that he just bought her. It's the thing that they managed to hold on to and like not pawn,
Yes. And costuming wise, I kind of like the idea of them both kind of shedding who they were. So if she was like a badass who dressed against the system and he was all starched up, I kind of like the idea of them in like kind of natural beach clothes, like linen or something comfortable that shows that not only costume wise that they're on the same page now, but that they're happy, like they're beautiful and happy together, like they're wearing this yellow linen or something.
Right. And the idea being that that his suit and her like rebellious clothes were not necessarily as much part of her personality as much as they were armor.
Armor, totally. They've taken it off. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I really want to see this now. I'm casting it.
I know, I feel like you have a very movie brain for you to bring up.
Yes.
I don't have a movie brain, unfortunately.
Well, I don't know, Skye. As soon as you were just like the mom, I was like, yes, yes, yes. Because, that's very, having kind of the stakes of spending time with a beloved person before it's this. I have a book coming out on, I guess, when is this book coming out? I guess it's Thursday or Friday. And one of the things I have in it is like when one of the some of the butter of a holiday romance is when there's a relative who's close to death, who you get to spend a beautiful moment with before they die, and so it's just always so nice because it's one of those kind of unspoken fantasies that a lot of humans have, which is like a beautiful moment, a last holiday with your loved one, and especially if they die beautifully in their sleep as opposed to how most people die. It's just kind of like that's for holiday romances, for whatever reason, that always hits you right in the feels when you get a relative and you get to spend this time with them. And I really, 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 and I think this might be big in intercultural romance, but particularly with intercultural romances where there's a heightened chance that the parents won't approve of you. I really love a story where the parents are just like, you're wonderful.
Right.
I approve of you. You don't have to kind of go through you're not from the same culture, that I have to introduce you to this person. I love when the parents just love the love when the other person's parents like just love this person, especially if the romantic lead isn't getting it from their own parents.
Yes. Yes. What is the name of the book you said that you have coming out?
Oh, Universal Fantasy List romance.
Okay. I thought you were going to say it was a fiction book.
No.
Okay. I'm going to ask you that in a minute. Okay. But first, before we do that, we have to come up with a title. That's the last thing we have to do. Are you a title lover? Or are you not a title lover?
No, I'm a terrible. I always just say her ruthless doctor.
That is a very Theodora Taylor title right there.
Her ruthless biker.
I mean, I feel like we know what I would have titled it, considering I have a book called The Pawn and the Knight and the Castle and the Queen.
Oh, nice.
I obviously can't call it that now, but like that is. Do we want to do doctor or do we want to do like king or something? Because it's got like the chest, like ruthless king.
I don't think it's not a ruthless story. This is actually this is pretty high concept. It's pretty great. It's actually more commercial than I usually write. So I wouldn't say it was particularly ruthless.
Right. He's not that ruthless. Like he has his moment of anger,
right.
But for the most part, it's just like it's more the steaminess of it.
Right. So something the doctor. Faking a doctor, faking with the doctor.
Oh, faking
something that's just super on the nose is always my next. Unless you can really do clever wordplay or titles, which I'm sadly not great at. I'm always just like, well, just make it obvious what you're going to get with this.
I think that probably helps a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Like, make it obvious. I struggle with that. I'm always like, yeah, the pawn. What is it about? You just have to read it and find out. Do you think anything about the honeymoon?
Oh, I mean, you could obviously do the shock of it, like honeymoon with my sister's ex, but I don't love it. So
I do like the word faking because they're faking their relationship, but also she's kind of faking who she even is. And she's faking an experience.
Yes.
Facts that she doesn't have. And he's gonna figure that out and teach her.
So I like faking it with the doctor, but I also like fake honeymoon with the doctor. But I would love, like, this is when you would call your author friends who are great at titles and say, I have something, I want to call it fake honeymoon with the doctor. And they'd be like, nah, girl, like, here's your title. We all have those friends.
I feel like fake honeymoon might be because I don't know how tropey doctors are. Like I don't know if anyone's searching for doctors.
I'm horrible. I would honestly say fake honeymoon with Dr. Darcy, and basically get that butter is Dr. Darcy. So you have like fake honeymoon. You have that it's a Darcy like character. We could maybe, I'm not sure. I'd have to look.
What if it was just Dr. Darcy? Obviously, I just like shorter titles because I just keep trying to shorten it. I'm like, how about just fake honeymoon? How about just Dr. Darcy?
I like Dr. Darcy. I do not like just fake honeymoon, but I like Dr. Darcy. Like Dr. Darcy is like, ooh, what's that all about? And because I love Pride and Prejudice, it's always like, damn it, don't read the back. Don't read the back. I'm already reading the back. It's just like it said Dr. Darcy. It said Darcy in the title.
I like Dr. Darcy too because it's very like hot, like a like those Penelope Ward by Keelan books or the Louise Bay books where it's just like Mr. Moneybags, it's just like CEO, whatever. And
I can see like him on the cover, just
exactly a guy on the cover.
Yeah, just
Dr. Darcy.
Yeah, just looking like smug and buttoned up and yes, Dr. Darcy.
Dr. Darcy.
I see you, Dr. Darcy.
Okay, so we did it. All the way to the end. Now I'm going to ask you, if readers like Dr. Darcy, what in your catalog should they start with?
Oh, geez, Louise. Well, it's funny. Right now, my book, His Pretend Baby, is number 4 in the German store. Like, we're running a promotion on it. It is number 4 in the German store. And I was just like, that's so interesting that even in another language, this story like just really, kills, it translates. And it's kind of the same situation. He's a tech billionaire, but he's very buttoned up. He's from a family that isn't rich. He's from a working class family, but he's become this tech billionaire. And when he first meets her, she's dating his brother, and then his brother dies. She's pregnant, so he's just like, "You will marry me." And so in the marriage it goes into in an interesting direction. So that's where I would recommend, if you like that and you like the idea of two people who are wearing a lot of armor, like taking it off for each other and becoming closer, then definitely His Pretend Baby is the way to go.
Well, thank you so much, Theodora. This was a lot of fun.
This was so much fun. Thank you.
Yay. Okay, so we're going to put the links in this. We're going to put links to like any book that we talked about or show that we talked about, as well as the link to His Pretend Baby, so that you guys can go read it. Thank you guys for coming to Storytime with Skye. Thank you so much for listening to Storytime with Skye. I hope you enjoyed the story we crafted this week. Please subscribe so you don't miss a new episode, and leave a review so that other listeners can find our show. We always put links for any books we discuss, as well as books by the guest author, in the show notes, so you can definitely find something new to read. And if you want to help choose our romance adventure, be sure to join our Facebook group, Storytime with Skye. That's where we gather suggestions and poll our readers, just like you, to find out what our next story will be. Thank you for being part of the story.
Welcome to the